Welcome to all of you. I see a lot of familiar and beloved faces in this room, folks I haven't seen in a while. So happy for that. A lot of new faces as well. And a lot of people, of course, whose faces I can't see. And I assume that your faces are great. I am Kate Pralber-Quam. I'm the co-founder and vice president of the Vermont Asylum Assistance Project, which is a legal services and technical assistance provider that was founded to raise awareness of and access to critical immigration legal help and support in Vermont. We achieve that mission through statewide direct service delivery, coordinating pro bono attorneys, offering technical assistance, community education, and administrative and legislative advocacy. The turnout for this event tonight is overwhelming, which is a testament to the level of commitment in Vermont right now to support our immigrant neighbors. Kira and I will ask you for grace. There are only two of us, and this is a time to do what we can with what we have where we are. So we have somebody, I think Nastasia is going to help us try to moderate the chat. You're welcome to put questions in the chat as we go. We'll hope to have some time for Q&A at the end as well. And we're going to put people in breakout rooms to introduce yourselves in smaller groups. But yes, please feel free to put in the chat who you are, where you're coming from, what your pronouns are, anything that you feel like is important to share with the rest of the room. So the Vermont Asylum Assistance Project, or VAP, and the National Lawyers Guild got together to hold this event in response to the good work that you are already doing. There are lots of people in this room who are already accompaniers and solidarity activists. VAP was founded because there aren't enough immigration attorneys in the state. And as the administration ramps up its repression, that is more true than ever. So our goal is to build a scaffolding of legal understanding to support the work of the people in this room, to outline the main interactions that immigrants regularly have with ICE in our communities, and introduce the kinds of legal help that could be bolstered by effectively documented and effectively shared witness testimony, right? We want to deploy you all as effective accompaniers and effective legal observers. You are the witnesses, ready to prevent ICE aggression when it happens from being invisible. So thank you for that. A little bit of Zoom hygiene. Please turn off your microphones when you're not speaking. Please feel free to raise questions or comments in the chat, but understand that we may not be able to get to all of them. Yeah, Kira, I will pass it to you.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for gathering tonight and having me. Really honored to be working with Kate on this agenda tonight. And for context, so my name is Kira Kelly. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns. I'm an attorney licensed in the state and federal courts of New Hampshire and Minnesota, as well as the Federal Immigration Court System, EOIR, as well as some sovereign tribal nations out on the west side of Turtle Island. I practice a bit of criminal defense, a bit of civil, a little tiny bit of immigration. That's a learning curve for me. And yeah, a lot of just like general legal support for social movements, fighting for collective liberation. Yeah, and I'm here, I guess, as a volunteer with the National Lawyers Guild. This is a training about legal observing with a lowercase L and a lowercase O. Not to be confused with like legal observing trademarked, the National Lawyers Guild program with the neon hats. So this training is really focused specifically on your rights as a civilian when trying to mitigate the violence of this racist, xenophobic, militarized deportation machine, and what to do when you are observing immigration authorities, when you encounter agencies, out and about, what your rights are, what things that could incur risk for you might be, and how to avoid incurring that risk. We'll have about 10 minutes, hopefully, for questions at the end, as well as anytime you have a question, pop it in the chat, and we'll try to get to it as best as we can. And obviously, this is not, there's so much we could be talking about. This training could take 10 hours. So, we're doing what we can, and we're giving ourselves grace for the things that we can't get to. Just some kind of opening notes on what we mean when we say legal self-defense, which is the foundation for a lot of this training content. We're not experts in your experience. And so when I talk to an immigration officer, they're going to be talking to me very differently based on, my accent, my white skin color, the fact that I have a law degree, if I'm throwing legal jargon at them, my age or ability, any of that. So like, we're not trying to really come at this with any kind of top down, this is what you need to do, but rather like, here's some things that you can think about and apply in your own life. Yeah, and trying to dismantle white supremacy culture wherever we find it. Um, the yeah, next slide if you can. Something that I like to emphasize in this type of training is like um, the the president right now is like kind of operating to divide us on these like lines of identities and politics. And I like to resist that by saying, you know, it's okay if we're coming at this from slightly different orientations as long as we have shared values. So for me, those values are compassion and anti-racism, intersectional solidarity. You probably have your own values that are at your core, and like I invite you all to like hold those and bring those into the space. It's okay if like somebody's a Democrat and somebody's an anarchist and somebody's a socialist and somebody's a communist. You know, we're all welcome in this space with whatever those identities are, as long as we can agree not to share this information with law enforcement. Obviously this is an unvetted training, so I'm not going to say anything here that is going to put myself at more legal risk than I'm already consenting to. And I would ask also for participants of this training to not share any information about anybody's citizenship status, any unlawful activities that you might have known about or be planning. Like, we're not talking about anything sensitive here just because it's such a big public chat that's being recorded. So um, that being said, like, we don't want to go out of our way to share this information with law enforcement. We know, I mean, look at Hartford, Vermont for the prime example of even when there's a fit policy in place, law enforcement are actively, gleefully collaborating with immigration authorities. So we really just want to not share anything about this training with any members of law enforcement, be that ICE or local police. Yeah, just trying to keep each other as safe as possible. You might be asking, what is legal self-defense? Uh,
Sorry, Kara. I'm on two different monitors and it just takes me a second to be able to switch.
oh, no worries.
Okay.
Thanks for doing the
Yeah,
switching.
of course.
So this is often called Know Your Rights, as a lot of the kind of concepts behind this training. I like to call it legal self-defense. Carl Williams taught me that. It's like basically to just say it's not a magic shield. It's not like once we memorize our rights, then they're automatically respected. Like, the Constitution was not written for anybody who wasn't a white man with property. So that's excludes a lot of us. And so we are doing the best we can with the tools that we're given, knowing that they're imperfect and yet like just it's a practice. Like, we do our best and we give ourselves grace when our best is not enough to like prevent harm. Um, and when I say law enforcement in this training, I'm referring, unless I specify otherwise, to any member of law enforcement, whether that's a police officer, a sheriff, a prosecutor, a prison guard, ICE, Border Patrol. And the general principle of this is minimizing your voluntary contact keeps everyone safer. The exception to that is when you're doing observing and documenting. So you're kind of in choosing to bear witness, to accompany people, and that increases a little bit the personal risk to yourself. But if you do it in an informed way, there's ways to do it that you can stay as safe as possible while flexing relative privilege in order to like advocate for other people that are really being targeted right now. So the two biggest questions to think about when you think about how do I use this information to document and to bear witness to like xenophobia and the militarized deportation scheme. First big question is, who are you? And second question is, who are you dealing with when you are having these interactions? So the US Constitution ostensibly applies even to undocumented people, even to people regardless of citizenship status. However, how that gets applied to you is going to vary significantly based on your projected identity. I think we know systemic racism is real and is baked into our legal system. Anti-immigrant, xenophobic sentiment, they're all baked into it. So I'm gonna try to help talk you through it. And so will Kate, like how these strategies might apply. But like again, you're the expert of your own experience, and if your experience is different, like trust your gut. We cannot control how law enforcement react to us, but we can control how we treat each other. So especially when we are trying to do intersectional, multiracial movement work, just trying to check in with people about like how our actions are going to impact the way that law enforcement, immigration authorities react to the other people in that interaction. There are a couple of different like types of law enforcement that I alluded to earlier, and the basic premise is that each agency enforces its own laws. So you've got federal immigration authorities who enforce federal immigration law. That's like, did you enter lawfully? Are you remaining with a reason to be here, with a some sort of status, or without status? Are you transferring people or drugs to the border? Those are the immigration laws enforced by ICE, CBP, which is also known as Border Patrol, and USCIS. ICE is more internal, and Customs and Border Patrol, we'll talk about this later, operates mostly within 100 miles of the oceans and the borders, as well as at ports of entry. So, and sometimes they'll be at the same place. Like Chicago is within 100 miles of the border, and they have ICE there. So ICE and CBP are like your immigration enforcement. USCIS, they're desk people. You don't really see them out in the field. When you're dealing with immigration authorities, the most important thing to do is to prevent violations of rights from occurring, because immigration courts are, just to summarize, like so egregiously corrupt that documenting rights violations doesn't always actually do anything, because you're not guaranteed an attorney in immigration court. The standard for an error, it has to be egregious for a judge to even consider it. And most judges are former ICE officers, so they're predisposed to essentially be anti-immigrant. So prevention is crucial when you're dealing with immigration authorities in terms of preventing violations of constitutional rights. On the other side of the law enforcement universe, you have state law enforcement. They enforce regulations on driving. Do you have a license? Are you under the influence? They enforce murder, theft, any of these just like run-of-the-mill crimes. There are also federal law enforcement officers that have nothing to do with immigration, like they enforce federal like interstate crimes, major like felonies for things like drug trafficking, racketeering, conspiracies, etc. Federal immigration authorities will never be enforcing state criminal laws. You may sometimes see the federal authorities delegate authority to state law enforcement to enforce immigration law. So like joint task forces where there are a bunch of different agencies working together, or what are called 287G holds, where local cops will hold on to somebody so that ICE has time to come pick them up. So that's an unfortunate and horrible practice that happens, but you will never be able to get a speeding ticket from an ICE officer. Like, just that's one way to think about it. Yeah.
Thank you, Kira. Um, yeah, a quick little sort of framing in terms of where we are on the clock in terms of deportation innovation in this country, which is an ever evolving infrastructure. I always find it to be a helpful grounding to remember that this is an imperial boomerang, right? The repressive tactics that we're seeing now were built in the US's colonies and imperial projects around the world, right? And they were brought home once they were perfected elsewhere. So what does that mean? It means that there is a long history of documenting and resisting human rights abuses that we can learn from, right? Some of this may be new to some of us. It's not new to most of the world. So we have a lot to learn, and there's a wealth of knowledge and support that exists in the world. In the last 2 years, we have seen the right to asylum in the United States gutted by the Biden administration, starting with Title 42, which a lot of you I know are already familiar with, which was used during COVID to strip people of their lawful right to seek asylum. At the same time, the Biden administration built an infrastructure to ship people out as fast as possible, right? So, for example, prior to last April, the regional immigration court that most Vermonters would go to was in Boston at the federal building. There were nine judges there, nine immigration judges. Right in April, a whole new facility opened in Chelmsford with an additional 12 judges. Right, so you had the infrastructure in this region of the country for deportation more than double. At the same time, there are an increasing number of ICE beds at detention facilities in Plymouth, in Swanton, in South Burlington, in Springfield, right? So remembering that this infrastructure of basically building a clearinghouse of deportation was built some years ago and handed off to the Trump administration to do what they would with, and now they're doing what they will with it, right? Um, what this means for us is that this is a project that has been ongoing for a long time. And it means that there are deep roots of resistance to it that can strengthen and inform the movement that we're all here to be part of. I'm sorry that my computer's so slow. Yeah, so just in terms of ice beds in local facilities, which I know VAP has been working with some really fantastic volunteers who have been mobilizing to go to detention facilities and do legal intakes and interpretation for folks who are inside. Um, the daily population of how many people in Vermont prisons are people who were detained by ICE has really skyrocketed in the last 6 months, right? So this image is from the Digger. Um, and it shows that they counted 10 ICE detainees in Vermont prisons in January, 20 in March. VAP is now doing its own internal tracking with the help of a lot of people in this room. In May, there were 58 just at Northwest in Swanton. So this is a population of people being shipped to Vermont prisons, some from in-state, some from out of state. A lot of people being shipped to Vermont prisons from Massachusetts right now who are detained in Massachusetts and then shipped to Vermont to be put in deportation proceedings. And that's something that's just exploding right now. So this is exactly the right time to get involved in this kind of accompaniment and legal observation work.
Um, so something to just start off with in terms of like when are you thinking about accompanying an observation is like how do you recognize ICE when they are out and about doing this enforcement work? And um, first and foremost, when in doubt, you are always legally allowed to just go up to somebody and ask them if they are an immigration enforcement officer, and ask them for their name and their badge number. Are they always honest in their response, and do they always give you that information? No, totally not. Immigration authorities lie all the time, but you're allowed to ask, and ostensibly they're supposed to tell you the truth. This is again one of those things where like ask, and if they lie and they're caught lying later, that potentially like could be something worth noting down as part of your observation. We've seen more and more these just like unidentified people wearing like the up to the nose face masks, kidnapping people off of the street. And yeah, so it is not to say that they're always going to be identifiable or that they always will identify themselves, but I think it's something important for us to do is continue to push for that identification, continue to demand and to be as entitled as you can to ICE officers having to identify themselves. And you can see the pictures that are on this slide, the three pictures on the left. So the top is like some of their more militarized uniforms. This is a Department of Homeland Security tank. That would be like you see that for a big high profile raid. You might see that, yeah, like as in conjunction with the joint task force with other members of law enforcement. We saw that here in Minneapolis in the main downtown area a couple of weeks ago. The under that with that red and black flannel, that is a picture that a friend of mine took in a courthouse. So immigration authorities were lurking in a state criminal courthouse to catch people that were coming in for their like a criminal proceeding. Maybe they were a defendant, maybe they were a witness. We don't really know. That ICE was just undercover and like lurking there. And then that smaller picture just to the right of that, where it says police in large letters on the back of the uniform, and then ICE in small letters on the shoulder. Those are ICE officers. A lot of times you do see ICE banging on the door and saying, police, open up. So they will play into the fact that they have uniforms that make them look like cops. And it's not a coincidence that the way that law enforcement, like police, the way that ICE, and the way that the US military are looking is all blending together. There are lots of federal programs where basically gently used military equipment gets recycled to local law enforcement. It's like all of the same companies profiting. It's like it all comes back to the military industrial complex and these recycled materials. So you might be confused about what you're looking at, and like that's not your fault. That's intentional. That's a byproduct of these recycled materials. I see a question in the chat. If you ask the question, are you an immigration officer? Is the officer required to answer? Theoretically, yes. Do they always? No. So ask and be entitled to the answer and know that you can't trust what they're saying, even if they are legally supposed to tell you the truth. They are allowed to lie. I always tell people to imagine that every time you're talking to law enforcement, they start their phrase with, I want you to believe that, and then whatever they're actually saying. So I was detained by Border Patrol a couple of years ago, and I was exercising my right to remain silent to draw more resources at a Border Patrol checkpoint. And they asked, "Are you a U.S. citizen?" I didn't say anything. They said, "You have to tell us who you are." I didn't say anything. They said, "We're going to keep you here until you tell us who you are." What they're really saying is, "We want you to think that we're going to keep you here until you tell us who you are." They kept me for like half an hour, and then they had to let me go because I had a right to remain silent. So again, just push back on things that they tell you, treat it with a healthy sense of skepticism, and try to get confirmation about who you're looking at before you post in a group chat in a panic that there is like ICE somewhere. Because especially for folks that are directly being targeted by immigration officers, if you're a family with people with mixed status in your family, like the what it does to your heart to be like living in this moment of fear, like I can only imagine. But we want to try to really be sure that we're spreading accurate information and not just needlessly subjecting people to the ongoing trauma of like ICE being around the corner at any point in time. So the salute acronym is really great, and that's in the slides that I shared in the chat, so that you can have that to remember. Try to get accurate information and try to confirm by asking them. The cautionary tale is this picture on the right. This is actually a Zamboni driver. The back of that person's jacket says ICE Center. They work at an ICE center. They drive a Zamboni. Somebody posted in Costco that there was ICE in Costco, and like that's not ICE, the immigration authority. The ICE center is like a hockey rink. So that is something to really just be mindful of. Like, go up to that person if you feel comfortable engaging in a conversation with the ICE agent, and just be like, "Hey, do you work for Homeland Security?" Before you go into that. Yeah. I'm gonna pause for the next slide, and I'll reshare this.
Thanks, Kira. Yeah, leave the Zamboni drivers alone for sure. Okay, a couple of main points of contact where immigrants might encounter ICE, not an exhaustive list. This might include supervision or wellness check appointments for unaccompanied minors who are staying with guardians, biometrics and fingerprinting appointments with USCIS, any kind of ICE check-in, court appointments of various kinds, which can include asylum hearings, master calendar, or merit hearings, and other anything for which the person has received a notice to appear. Traffic stops, and ultimately airport departures for detainees and proceedings. All of these are places where immigrant neighbors might encounter ICE. As you probably all know from following what's been happening in Vermont in the last 6 months, there is a growing ICE strategy of flying people out at night to do what's called venue shopping. So if people are in proceedings of any kind, it behooves ICE to have them in a court venue that is less sympathetic, right? That's further away from home. So you had, for example, some of the Palestinian and pro-Palestinian activists being flown to Louisiana or Texas or something, right? And part of our strategy is to keep those people close to home. So when we know the person's case and we know that that case would benefit from a delay, that's one form of intervention. It doesn't mean that everybody would benefit from a delay, right? In all of these points of contact, the accompanying person is not there necessarily to really intervene directly, right? We're there to be an effective witness to what's happening. The time to build a relationship with an immigrant in proceedings is as early as possible so that you know what the right legal strategy is going to be. In some cases, a public intervention in a deportation proceeding is likely to harm that person's case, right? Or result in an adverse outcome to their case. So it's good to know as much as possible about the person's case prior to intervening. In an early stage intervention, like a traffic stop, the presence of a legal observer may be a deterrent, right? Filming may be a deterrent. But it's good to remember that, especially in a kind of later stage interaction, ice is going to ice, right? Most of the time.
Are we back? Are we all back?
I think we are almost all back.
So this graphic on the left is also in the slides. Don't feel the need to memorize it. It goes over the three kind of like levels of interaction that are the basics of legal self-defense. The slides you have is like a whole full training on just that. So we're going to go over the basics of this from more of a high level. When I say like three levels of law enforcement interaction, the one exception to this is Border Patrol's special privileges. So keep in mind that we will talk about the 100 and the 25-mile special privilege zones in a little bit, but otherwise, this is the same between law enforcement, ICE, etc. The first level of interaction that any law enforcement officer, ICE, Border Patrol can do at any time to anybody for any or no reason is just to ask you questions. They're always allowed to ask questions. That being said, you're always allowed to assert your right to remain silent. And um, when you're just being questioned but not detained or arrested, you also have a right to leave, to end that interaction, to just say, hey, if I'm not being detained, I'd like to leave, and then to leave. They're going to maybe try to trick you into talking more. That trick about, I want you to believe that. So law enforcement might say something like, oh, well, if you just answer some questions, then you'll get out of here faster. And what are they really saying? I want you to believe that if you just answer some questions, you'll get out of here faster. But really, like if they had that information already, they wouldn't be asking you. The second level of police interaction is being detained, so a detention, and that's where you are like kept in one spot. You're not allowed to move or to leave, but you're not fully under arrest. So that's a different term. Like a legal detention is different than an immigration detention facility, for example. Like those are two separate terms, not to be confused. But like a legal detention, just like them keeping you in one place, that would be something like pulling you over in your car. Like they're keeping you in one spot. You're not allowed to drive away, but you're not under arrest just because you've been pulled over. So that might look like if I'm in a park right now. If I'm walking in the park and law enforcement says, "Hey, like I got some questions for you," and I say, am I free to go or am I being detained? And they say, yes, you're being detained. I'm not under arrest. At what point I do there is I just assert all of my rights and I clam up and I wait them out. So I don't consent to a search. I want to talk to an attorney. I have a right to remain silent and I just clam up. When you are detained in some jurisdictions, they can like pat you down to see if you have a weapon. It's not a full search. It's like supposed to be just kind of like for their safety to see, okay, is the person that I'm detaining have a weapon? Obviously, that's their justification. Oftentimes it is just a pretext, especially in instances of like, again, racial profiling, like law enforcement might find some made up reason to detain somebody and then pat them down for drugs, and whatever they find they end up getting to like use to escalate the situation. And that happens, obviously that is not something that typically happens to like white rich people in the suburbs. The third level, and they're trying to get from one level to the next always. So that third level is being placed under arrest. And for that, they need probable cause that you've done some crime, or they need a warrant. And they need the same thing if they want to search you. So if they want to arrest you or if they want to search you, they need to like have some facts that you committed a crime, or they need a warrant. And we'll talk about like what warrants are valid and which warrants aren't, but they need a valid warrant, or probable cause. And then lastly, too, like if you get arrested, they automatically get to search you. It's called a search incident to an arrest. So say I jaywalk and I get arrested for jaywalking because that's a crime, then they also get to search me. And like again, that is why like people of color, Black folks are much more likely specifically to get arrested for jaywalking because then they get to like search them. It's like a free pass for cops to search somebody. The biggest exception to all of this is consent. So you've got rights to remain silent. You've got rights to like leave unless they have reasonable suspicion or probable cause to arrest, detain you, etc., to search you. But if you consent, then they don't need anything. All they need is your consent, and they are allowed to lie in order to induce your consent. So that's where it gets tricky. And that's where I really practice those phrases like, hey, I'm not resisting physically, but I don't consent. And that's the line that I would repeat. I would say that line over and over so it's in my muscle memory so that I can whip that out anytime I am like dealing with law enforcement. I'm nervous, they're trying to search, they're trying to detain me, they're trying to do this, that, or the other. I say, hey, I'm not resisting, but I don't consent. I have a right to remain silent, and I'd like to see an attorney. Next, we're going to talk about warrants. So in order for a warrant to be valid, it has to like be specific to what that cop is trying to use it to do. Um, for example, if I have an arrest warrant that is like, say there's a warrant out for my arrest, that's not valid to get into my friend's house, even if I happen to be there. Like, the warrant for me only applies to me, not to the home that my friend has an expectation of privacy. So the warrant has to be signed by a judge, not by an immigration authority. That's the first and foremost thing. There are like this stack of forms that ICE officers keep in the back of their van that's basically like a fake prescription pad, and they can just sign their own warrant. And just because it says warrant on the heading of the paper doesn't mean that it's actually a warrant. Like a real warrant is signed by a judge, not by like some dude named Joe who like just pulled the paper out of the back of his truck. So look for the signature of a judge. It'll say judge or magistrate, and that's how you know it's signed by a judge. Um, if it's not signed by a judge, it's not a valid warrant so as to bypass your constitutional rights or the constitutional rights of like anybody, including an undocumented person that you might be with or trying to advocate for.
Have they ever tried to sign it with, like, fake a forgery with, starting with the term judge or magistrate?
I've never seen somebody fake that it says judge. Like they usually will the deceit comes in the fact that the word warrant is on the top of the paper. Um, I see the question in the chat about should you ask why am I being detained? And I would co-sign what Nastasia says, like engaging in conversation is a slippery slope. So you can always default to just staying silent, clamming up and waiting that interaction out. If you're feeling a little more confident and you want to push back, you can say, what reasonable suspicion do you have to detain me? And sometimes showing that you know your rights can be a way to like get them to back off a bit because they're like, oh, that person knows your ice. So I would say like use your best judgment, but staying silent is like the safest, best way to get out of that interaction. And totally co-sign Emma's comment that document as best you can because they're totally not gonna like they're like, on Halloween when you have like a big bowl of candy that's left out for people and like you're not monitoring it. And there's always going to be those people where if you're not watching them, they're going to take that whole bowl. Like that is law enforcement. That is ICE. When they are not held accountable, if nobody's looking, they're going to come in and take that whole bowl of candy and like it's like a sort of childish analogy, but that is what your rights are. Your rights are that bowl of candy. And like the more that's why there's so many constitutional violations when it comes to dealing with particularly unhoused people and particularly poor folks, folks who don't have the ability to like push back and advocate for themselves that are kind of like the most egregious constitutional right violations happen to folks that are marginalized, sex workers, people that are stigmatized, have already been criminalized that are less likely to be believed. And that's why like working together with people and trying to use your spotlight to like expose these violation rights makes it less likely that they'll happen. So the immigration warrants are like often really just like them saying, hey, we've got a right to like arrest this person. And they're going to take you into custody if they find you. But that's not for searching. The thing that they try to do is they use those to search. So kind of back to the point of this slide is like immigration authorities will use immigration arrest warrants as a way to induce your consent to access like a house. They'll say, I've got a warrant, so I have a right to come in your home. And it's like, well, that's not signed by a judge. That's just an immigration arrest warrant for like if you find this person and you're declaring your right to like arrest them. I would say like never physically resist because that can get really dangerous and you can get extra charges. But what you're doing is you're not consenting. A warrant that allows them to take something is different than a warrant that allows them to look somewhere. A search warrant also has to be specific about where they're at. Like if the address is wrong, if they're saying I have a right to search your bathroom, they shouldn't be in your bedroom. If they have a right to search the vestibule of a church, that doesn't mean they have a right to search the pastor's office, like etc. So really, if you're presented with a warrant, take a deep breath, take a picture of it, send it to an attorney if you can, and also like look at it really carefully, because what they're really trying to do is induce your consent to search wherever they want. Yeah, but next slide. Um, here's a picture, and you can probably see it easier on the copy of the slides that I shared, of like the difference between a judicial warrant versus an administrative warrant. So being really careful about that. Next slide. We've heard a lot about different policies in terms of like Biden being like, oh, these are sanctuary locations, and Trump being like, no, they're not. And just a reminder, especially this is hard for me, it's really overwhelming in the world that we live in right now, in the regime that we're under right now. Like things are changing. There are new executive orders every other day, or more than that. Like just everything is changing so fast. Ostensibly, the Constitution is supposed to be the same this whole time. The way that it gets enforced, sort of the strategy that Biden used to maintain racial capitalism and colonization and like systemic oppression, is different than the strategy that Trump is using. So the way the Constitution gets enforced is going to look different. The Constitution ostensibly should remain the same. The caveat being that Supreme Court precedent might change the way that things are interpreted, but that's going to be a much slower change than these like flurry of executive orders that are like literally designed to overwhelm us. So when it comes to something like sanctuary locations, really just looking to the Constitution for how to think about this, rather than Biden, his policy was like, hey, immigration authorities, like, please don't be so obvious about doing raids in hospitals and schools. Like, we want people to think that, that we're pretty gentle on our xenophobia. As opposed to Trump being like, we want to be doing more public raids. Like Biden would be more like raiding homes at 5 a.m, and Trump is more like, we're going to raid schools, we're going to make an example, we're going to be as high profile, as terrifying as possible. But like there's still a requirement that immigration authorities have a warrant when they go into areas that are not generally open to the public. And if they're in an area that is like open to the public, they can access that area by the same terms as the public. So for churches, like if somebody can just like walk in off the street and attend a church service, so can ICE. But if they can only attend the church service if they are like, sitting quietly listening to the sermon, then like if ICE starts coming in disruptively, it's within the purview of that minister, that congregation, to say, hey, the public is only allowed in here so long as they are quiet and maybe unarmed. If the general public is not allowed back behind the pulpit or in the basement or in the kitchen of the church, then neither is ICE unless they have a warrant signed by a judge specific to that space, or unless they have consent. So that's why it's really important to like have, if you are like at your workplace, at your school, at your wherever you might be, to have these kind of clear policies around, okay, the public needs to only be in this area, and then the patient rooms are private, or in order to access a school, a member of the public has to check in at the front desk and present a valid reason and then get approved, get a visitor pass. Like a classroom is not open to any members of the general public, so they're not open to ICE, regardless of whether Trump or Biden says this or that about a sanctuary location. I'm gonna try to get to some of these questions in the chat. Can a church state and require the public to be unarmed? So a church is a private building, and private buildings can control the way that people are allowed to like access them. So like the Unitarian church that I grew up going to, like they can say, okay, the sanctuary is open to people during these hours, or the basement is open to people accessing the food shelf. But if you're not using the space in the way that the church has designated, then they have the authority to say, hey, like you you can't be here. Like if you're not here for the food shelf, you're not allowed to just like hang out in this space. So one of those requirements could be as a private space, like I have a right as like a tenant to set parameters over who can access my home and to say, hey, you can't bring a gun into my home. And so that's the same for like private organizations and entities or nonprofits or what have you. And yeah, the Kate's point as well, like a restaurant dining room versus a kitchen. So ICE can't come back into the kitchen without a warrant because neither could a member of the general public. Arguably, unless ICE is like a paying customer eating a meal, they shouldn't even be coming in the dining area of a restaurant because that's not open to the general public. It's only open to paying customers. Yeah, that I think that slide, maybe next slide.
We're talking about rules regarding Vermont or just like federally, nationally.
This is nationwide. This is the federal constitution is the sort of source of these rights and the distinction between public and private.
So the kidnappings that happened in LA, those were completely unconstitutional. In terms of like the schools that got raided, and parents were torn away from like their kids' graduation parties.
So I'm not super familiar with like exactly how that played out on the ground. But consent is always an exception to the Fourth Amendment. So if somebody at that school was afraid enough or was bullied enough or was you know, like careless or cruel enough to consent to ICE coming into that space, then they could. That's why it's really important to like be advocating for everybody to be learning as much as possible about like how to assert that Fourth Amendment right. To say, hey, I don't consent to you coming into this space. It's not open to the public. You need a warrant. Because consent is always an exception to the Fourth Amendment prohibition on like accessing private spaces without a warrant. So this slide talks about like for people who are maybe like have citizenship privilege or have like solid status, people with white privilege, people who are more comfortable asserting their rights against ICE. This is the strategy for you. This would not be advice that I would give to somebody who is more concerned with being racially profiled, being kidnapped by ICE, etc. Like this is for folks that are like, I want to flex my privilege and I feel comfortable taking a little bit of a risk. If ICE gets on a bus, say they board the AT, the public bus system in your town, and they are going to march down the line of seats and ask everybody what their status is. You have a right to assert your constitutional rights and to encourage everyone around you to do the same, as long as you're not like going specifically to somebody that you know to be undocumented and like coaching them or helping them get away. So if ICE gets on a bus, I'm going to go to the front of the bus and I'm going to say really loudly that I have a right to remain silent, that everyone on the bus has a right to remain silent, that nobody wants to talk to them. And what I'm doing that is I'm just like kind of asserting my right in a way that's also protective of everyone else, regardless of status. Like I'm not going to only do this if I know someone's undocumented. Like I'm going to do this because it's in our best interest as a society if we like all assert our rights, because it makes it less conspicuous when you know, if somebody asserts their rights who is like maybe a person of color, maybe is more vulnerable, maybe is like has a visa or a green card or something or doesn't, we don't want them to stand out for asserting their rights. We want to all just make it normal for these rights to be asserted, because otherwise we'll lose them. And we're seeing this attack across the board on our constitutional rights. So I'll go to the front of the bus and I'll say, hey, sir, you don't have a right to force people to talk to you if they don't want to. I have a right to remain silent. So does everyone on this bus, and we're using that right. And kind of same thing, like if ICE comes into a school or, you know, if they try to like go into a church and just like, if they're entering by the same terms as the general public is entering, that they're legally allowed to be there. So in that case, the move is just to say, I have a right to remain silent. So does everyone around me. If they're trying to enter an area that is not open to the public, then that would be the point where somebody with authority over the space, so like an employee of that establishment, maybe a teacher or administrator if it's a school, maybe a staff person if it's a hospital, like they would say, hey, members of the public are not allowed beyond this point. You need a warrant to come into this area that's only open to employees or XYZ, like category of private individuals. I would say like take a look at these slides afterwards, like wait 20 minutes, wait a day or two, go back over them and practice saying these things out loud. It's really scary sometimes for folks. I know it is for me to like talk to law enforcement. They're oftentimes big, they're oftentimes masked, they often have weapons. Fear is an intentional tactic they use. So you want this in your muscle memory so that when you're panicking, this is what comes out, is like these assertions of rights. Um, and now I think this is like, yeah, kind of one of the things I think we're out here to learn is like, can we film ice? What happens when we see ice out in the wild? Like what can we do to try to make it so that when they break the Constitution, when they violate our rights, they are like held accountable. And that's really like shining that spotlight on the people that are trying to just like take more than they're allowed, and take our neighbors and take our community members and instill fear in all of us. So you have a legal right to film in any state. There are different laws in different states about like whether you need one or two party consent to record any interaction, regardless of whether it's law enforcement. So like in order to record somebody in New Hampshire, you have to have that person's consent. You can't like secretly record them. Um, but as long as you're filming publicly, then they know and they're like consenting to the recording by continuing to do whatever it is they're doing. So if I'm filming, I'm not going to be sneaky about it. I'm not going to hide the camera. I'm going to be out in public just in case so that I don't have to memorize which state is a one party or which state is a two party consent state. I just always film notoriously. Also, that's beneficial because like if they know they're being filmed, there is just like a little extra layer of accountability there. When I am filming, like, even though in order for them to take my phone, they would need a warrant that says like I have a warrant to seize your phone, or a probable cause that I have committed a crime. So like if I film someone else committing a crime, that doesn't mean they get to take my phone because the probable cause of criminal activity has to do with me and not some other person. That being said, are they going to try to take your phone? Like, yeah, they shouldn't. They're legally not allowed to without those prerequisites. But if they're upset and you're in front of them, who knows what they're going to try to do. So just as a safety precaution, like it's really important to prepare your phone. Disabling biometrics. Do people know what biometrics are? I'll just say, it's that thing when like your phone unlocks if you hold it in front of your face, or if you like push your thumb on the bottom part. So if I push my thumb on the phone and it unlocks, or if I hold it in front of my face, those are biometrics. And the reason it's important to disable them and to instead use a long passcode is because law enforcement, say they do grab your phone, say they hold it in front of your face. Now they have your unlocked phone. Whereas to crack a phone with a passcode, they couldn't just grab your thumb and put your thumb on it. They would have to like take it to a device, like a Cellubrite device, and extract your phone. And that's much more complicated. A lot of law enforcement, like especially smaller jurisdictions, don't have access to that type of equipment yet. So it's just an added layer of precaution in the event that they do take your phone. Also, just like clearing up space, so that you have space on your phone to film. There's nothing worse than trying to film and running out of space, and then you actually can't capture the interaction. You can enable auto backup so that it goes straight to the cloud, but it's recommended that you don't live stream it and you don't post it on social media. We've seen a lot of people, like especially with technology the way that it is, like law enforcement will go through these videos and then come back and like arrest people, put warrants out months later for activity that they see in a live stream. So you're putting yourself at risk by live streaming, you're putting the people around you at risk. Like you can't control what that camera captures and like how it might look, or how it more importantly might get misconstrued to people that are trying to then like retaliate for whoever was there. So the best practice is to like record and then wait and send it to like an immigration attorney that's working on the case, or send it to the person that's being videoed. And then just like also keeping in mind using your de-escalation skills. Like to de-escalate, I will try to like slow my voice down to just bring the energy down. I'll speak in a low voice, not in a high-pitched voice, and I will like make sure my movements are slow. Law enforcement, immigration authorities, they're dangerous, and it's it sucks that this is the world that we live in, but like it's kind of on us to keep each other safe. And so by really trying to use my de-escalation skills as best as I can to bring the energy down, then I'm sort of trying to keep law enforcement from getting amped up and like hurting other people. Also standing, if you're filming them, try to stand on the side of their body that is opposite their firearm. So if they're right-handed, their firearm, their gun is going to be on their right-hand side. Try to position yourself to their left. Just the closer you are to their gun, the more like antsy they get and the more likely they are to like react in a way that could be dangerous.
Back to biometrics. What about passcodes where you kind of like draw lines connecting the dots?
Passcodes are great. Long passcodes are great. It's okay if they're the lines or the typing in, but just not thumb or face.
Okay. They can't ask you to unlock that, or they can't, yeah, unlock that.
Right, they can't. And if it's okay, just for time's sake, like to put questions in the chat. We've got some chat helpers that are helping with questions. While you are filming ice, yeah, try to like do your best to get consent from the person. So I do this whether it's immigration authorities or it's like some person that is like on the street. If I'm riding my bike and I'm biking past somebody and I see that they're being like harassed by law enforcement, I'll try if I can to just like come up and say, hey, like, are you okay? Like, do you want me to film, you know, something short and simple, and like try to just cue to them, hey, I'm not here to like escalate the situation or to like live stream you and put you on social media. I'm just like try to see if you're safe. So try to communicate that as best you can. And obviously sometimes you come upon a situation and things have escalated to the point where that person really doesn't have the capacity to like make eye contact with you or like for you to have a consent check-in. So, you know, do your best and give yourself grace if you can't have that interaction. ICE might say, or law enforcement, anybody might say, hey, like you can't film, you have to move back, like you're obstructing, you're in my way. When they say you're obstructing, you're going to get arrested if you don't move back, what are they really saying? I want you to believe that you're going to get arrested for filming me. I want you to believe that you're going to get arrested for not moving back. So not to say that they're lying, like anybody can totally get arrested for anything, even if the charges don't later stick because they didn't have a right to do that. That experience of being arrested, especially like we are seeing ICE push their boundaries constantly. So I wouldn't discount that threat when they threaten you with arrest. I would just say like they don't trust that they're right. But it might not matter whether they're right. They might try it anyway. So in that situation, again, I would really try to like de-escalate as much as possible, and say, hey, I understand that you're upset. I have a constitutional right to film. I'm not trying to intervene. Where would you like me to stand so that I can see and you can do your job, or something like that, and practice that so it's in your muscle memory. And if you can, like, move your phone down to catch your feet, taking a step backward, and then go back to filming. I wouldn't stop and start. I would say always continuously film when you're shifting the lens to capture different things. Like, don't stop and start, just like angle the camera down, move, catch your feet moving, and then angle it back up to continue filming. And you want to try to focus on filming law enforcement, not on the civilians, not on the people that are being harassed by law enforcement. You know, try not to film faces if at all possible of like civilians. It's totally fine to film ISIS faces, to film Border Patrol or law enforcement faces, like they, yeah. But just not the people that they're filming. And just know that like if this is used in court, you want to really try not to narrate, especially in ways that are incriminating. So not talking about somebody's immigration status or their criminal history or their country of origin, or like, you know, like you wouldn't want to say like, oh, they got my neighbor, like, I wonder if it's because he's in the French mafia, or like, oh, his warrants finally caught up to him, or like, oh, I wonder if they saw him like do this crime, blah blah blah. Like, not saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Kira. And I think just to say the same kind of ethos applies to recording printed notes as to recording on video. You know, some of community advocates right now are maybe erring on the side of handwritten notes to support something like habeas proceedings or other legal remedies. And we want to focus on what the officials did at any given point, not necessarily how the person being impacted reacted, but what the officials did that they were supposed to do or weren't supposed to do, or what they didn't do that they were supposed to do. We want to be able to document all of that in writing, even when film isn't part of it. See if I can switch the slide. Okay. Yeah, so Kira talked a lot about sort of how to film. In terms of what to film, you want to contextualize what people are seeing, right? So you want to focus, Kira mentioned you can focus on law enforcement officials' faces, that's fine. You might also want to pan down a little bit and look at their badge, right? If they're wearing one, see what their name is, see what agency they represent, what they're wearing, their uniforms or the lack of uniforms, right? What weapons they're carrying, their vehicles. Are they marked? Are they unmarked? What does the plate look like? You know, try to focus on those things in that moment as well. Any paperwork that's presented, if you're close enough and if you're in a position to pan down and look at a warrant, if they show you a warrant, you can film it. Any kind of verbal orders from or communication between agents is really helpful to have on film. Contextualizing the event in terms of where it happened, right? Street signs, landmarks, and nearby clocks, right? So, you know, think about panning around to see so that a viewer who wasn't there can see where something happened and you can prove that that's where it happened. Any property damage caused by law enforcement, right? Breaking car windows is the hot thing that everybody's doing right now, right? That ICE officials are deciding to break into people's cars unnecessarily. So documenting that, documenting any other kind of broken windows, any damage to automobiles, documenting other cameras, right? In case footage from those cameras might also be useful in a courtroom. Body cameras that police are wearing, security cameras on nearby buildings, members of the press, other people filming. You can get those in your own footage. Take note if there are multiple agencies on the scene, right? If the police and the state police and ICE are all present, make sure you capture all of them if you can. Any audio of people invoking their rights so that it can be proven later that they did invoke their rights, that they asked for an attorney and were not granted one, that they said they were exercising their right to remain silent and that wasn't respected. Obviously, any kind of use of force or brutality is good to get on film. You know, and that said, I think two other things to note. One is to not edit your original footage. If you are going to edit your footage, even if it's just to trim it or to clip it or to zoom in or to zoom out, make a copy first before you do that so that the original copy is untouched, because otherwise officials might be able to say that it was tampered with or edited and will try to dismiss it. And the other thing, you know, the sort of zoom out perspective to have here is to consider your own risk, right? Assessing your risk level before you are recording. And not just assessing your risk level in order to decide whether or not to do it, but to predict, you know, whether or not you are going to be charged with something. I think things are ramping up to the point that we should anticipate that those of us who are doing this work may eventually be charged with something, right? So be in community with other people who know where you are, have people that you can call for support in those moments is a really good way that we can all protect ourselves in those moments. Kira, I'll pass it back to you.
So we touched on this a little earlier, or alluded to it. The general, like the exception to the general rule about law enforcement needing reasonable suspicion to detain you and probable cause to search your property or to enter a private space. Border Patrol has exceptions to that. So Customs and Border Protection operate along both the U.S. Canadian and U.S. Mexico border, as well as the coasts. There is a 100-mile zone, so that goes basically everywhere White River Junction and north, if you're thinking about Vermont, as well as most of New Hampshire, because New Hampshire is mostly within 100 miles of the ocean. And in that 100-mile zone, Border Patrol can detain you for any reason or for no reason. Just to like ask you questions. They can prevent you from leaving. And the Supreme Court says it has to be a brief detention, but that word is super vague. Oftentimes vague or ambiguous terms are just an invitation for law enforcement discretion. which manifests typically in the form of like systemic racism. What? Sorry. No. So sorry, I'm in a park.
Yeah, just to add to the chat, Suki, because you signed on after we started, there is a tracking project going on in Vermont to track how many ICE detainees are being held in Vermont at any given time. And that's a public link that either Leaf or I can share.
Sorry about that. So the 100-mile zone encompasses 2/3 of the population, like people that are living in the US, live within that zone because most of the major cities are along the coasts. If you're going through a checkpoint, they're allowed to like pull your car over and put spike strips in front of the tires so that you can't leave. They're allowed to like take a flashlight if it's nighttime, or take dogs, like scent dogs, and walk them around the outside of your vehicle. It's only detention that is allowed, so it's not an arrest and it's not search. They're not allowed to search your car unless a scent dog alerts, which then constitutes probable cause. But they're allowed to ask you questions. You still have a right to remain silent. So in this situation, if you are a US citizen and you're at a checkpoint, that can be an opportunity to assert your right to remain silent, to not answer their questions. You still have that right. I would say like be, particularly careful if you are like someone who grew up in Vermont and you deal with the checkpoints that we see here, and then you go to the US-Mexico border. Just like it's sort of a different level of just like viciousness at that border. It's a little bit, yeah, it's terrifying. Like the intensity is different. So I mostly have spent time in the Northeast, and like that's my experience there. Like use your best judgment and trust your instincts when you are applying this information along the southern border, because the character is different. There are interior checkpoints like in these kind of southern cities in New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, where you can't go in or out of like El Paso, Texas without going through a checkpoint. Even if you're 90 miles from the border, they'll still stop every single car that goes by and ask if you're a citizen. They have no authority to enforce state criminal laws. So if you are violating a state criminal law, what they'll typically do is they'll call the local police department and come get you. Like if you're being detained and they notice your tags are expired, or if you are like doing something at the checkpoint that is maybe disruptive in a way that violates a state law, because they don't have the authority to enforce those state laws, they'll just call the cops on you and they'll detain you until those cops get there. So just being like pretty careful about that. And then the other special privilege that CBP has is within 25 miles of the border. So that's like the Northeast Kingdom, Swanton, like farther north, they can go in your land and outbuildings without any probable cause, without a warrant. There's like a lot of, just like, again, this is the ways that like the vagueness in these terms is compounding systemic racism. Like a lot of migrant farm workers, or people who are like socioeconomically like struggling, they live in a barn because they like, can't afford a house, and that becomes subject to that 25-mile special privileges, and that could be searched. So like a rich person in a house has more protections because that house is clearly outside of the parameters of this like land and outbuildings search requirements. But for somebody who is like going through hard times and they're living in like something that could be deemed an outbuilding, and that's subjective, like just an assessment that Border Patrol gets to make. So they're happy to like skew their interpretation in a way that's favorable to their authority, then they can search that building. Yeah, everywhere, like they still need probable cause or a warrant to search your person, to search your vehicle, to arrest you, and you still always have a right to remain silent. And this last slide is about what risks you might encounter when you are doing advocacy work. There's a really great and more comprehensive Know Your Rights like website, pamphlet, what have you, that is put together by the National Lawyers Guild. So I'll share that in the chat. But just like the big picture overview is like, it is unlawful to like intervene in an immigration enforcement action. So you are risking like really serious charges, federal charges, by like trying to disrupt when somebody is actively being deported, and that's like really dangerous. If you know somebody to be undocumented and you intentionally are like concealing them, that's a scary federal charge. If you are like running and tackling an ICE agent as they're trying to deport somebody, that's a federal charge. That's a really serious charge. Like those things are very legally risky and can like really like do a number on anybody that is intervening in that way and be physically dangerous too. So the more that you can like have your actions and support be like not about somebody's status and not about an immigration proceeding, the less legal risk that carries. Like if I have a yard, like I have a big yard, and I just like let people camp in my yard if they need a place to stay, and I don't ask them their status, and I'm not just like doing that to help people hide from ICE, that's like a very different story than if I'm like part of some sort of, like Underground Railroad whose specific purpose is like helping people that are undocumented or are being sought after by ICE. It is lawful to like, do mutual aid. Like, well, it's uh, it's being targeted in Atlanta and other like jurisdictions, but theoretically, just doing mutual aid is lawful. Obviously, anybody can get arrested for anything, and like criminalization is like a tactic that is being used right now to deter like the advocacy for human rights. That being said, just like generally helping people out is not unlawful. So just like doing that as opposed to specifically helping people who you know to be undocumented, that's kind of where that line is. Um, and again, the question is like not necessarily what are you actually doing, but like what can the government like try to prove that you're doing, or what can they allege you're doing? So like even if I don't know somebody's status, I could still get in trouble if it looks like I do. Um, if it looks like I had that information in mind. You can, so if you're like specifically making a beeline for somebody that you believe to have like precarious status and then giving them a know your rights tutorial, that would be legally risky. Kind of the other end of the spectrum is like what I'm doing right now, where I haven't asked and I don't want to know anybody's status on the Zoom call. I just want to share general legal self-defense, know your rights information. So like that's kind of where you fall on the spectrum depends on how much you could be accused of knowing about the person you're giving aid to. And like also how close you are to the border. We saw the group No Mas Muertes, No More Deaths. They were criminalized for giving humanitarian aid to people at the border, like putting water out in the desert. And that was deemed like they were charged like pretty seriously for that. So that um in part had to do with their proximity to the border. Like leaving water out for people is going to carry much more legal risk when you're close to the border, as opposed to when you're like outside of that 25 or outside of that 100-mile zone. But again, this is kind of just like um, up to people about like your personal choice of how much risk you want to take and like ways to mitigate that risk. And then also like knowing that specifically with Trump, one of his primary tactics right now is like anticipatory compliance, where he will threaten stuff that he doesn't have the authority to do and trust that people will be so afraid that they'll stop doing something, even something that they have the right to do or that isn't actually criminalized. Like it's that gray area where like it seems lawful, it seems constitutional, it seems legal, but he's gonna say like, nope, I'm criminalizing that, and then trust that people will move back of their own accord to like preemptively obey.
But encouraging folks to look over these resources, non-exhaustive resources that Kira has compiled. And then I also had put some links in the chat to how to get involved with VAP, how to follow VAP, where there are lots and lots of updates about relevant information to this conversation that are posted on our social media and in our very exhaustive newsletter that folks are welcome to sign up for as well. It's 8, so I want to respect folks' time and close us out. I will put this form in the chat one more time. If folks are interested in getting involved with VAP and staying in touch, there are lots and lots of ways to do that, both for attorneys and non-attorneys like myself. So yeah, really appreciate all of you, and thanks for being here and spending your time with us. And thanks for being part of a community presence to protect people's rights, build solidarity, yeah, and put our bodies on the wheels.